Number 10. Jordan Grider. Jordan Grider's disappearance has left law enforcement and true crime enthusiasts stumped since his campground in northern Minnesota was found back in 2018. During the dead of winter, the 29-year-old decided to go camping by himself. Even though the Appalachian Trail is known to be extremely dangerous that time of year, Jordan was eager to take on the challenge. Little did he know it'd be the last trip he'd take. His family wasn't worried when he didn't contact them for a while, since he had always been a survivalist that loved being outside. Once enough time passed to raise concern, the search started. Luckily, Jordan parked his truck on a private area of the trail, so police were notified quickly. When they finally found his camping spot, they saw a considerable amount of blood in the hammock and sleeping bag. It took officials days to find hand and arm bones belonging to Grider. But even with this and years passing after the initial incident, the majority of his body has still not been discovered. Some think he was eaten by wolves after an accident. But what do you think happened to Jordan? Number 9. Jolie Harris. Jolie Harris searched Google for windpipe location and antifreeze while on a camping trip with her girlfriend. Harris seemed curious if antifreeze had any particular flavor and how long it might take a human to die after drinking it. A camper discovered the pair just a few days later resting under a blanket. Her partner was motionless and Harris said they'd been attacked. Not long after, the police arrived and pronounced the woman dead. She'd bled out from a head wound and suffered a serious cut to her throat. Harris, on the other hand, received only minor injuries from the supposed attack, and it didn't take a genius to name Harris as the primary suspect since there was no evidence that anyone else had been at the scene. Despite the fact that she was charged with her partner's death, no information regarding her trial has been leaked to the public since. Number 8. Maxine Bainton. Maxine Bainton and her husband had spent the day walking before heading to a bar to sit down for lunch with their 4 sons. Then they quickly returned to their camping spot in Pistol, Wales. Bainton's spouse claimed that each had a bottle of wine during the day. When the day was over, he went to his camper van for the night, but his wife wanted to stay up a little longer. Bainton's husband was shocked when he woke up around 1 a.m. to find his wife hadn't come to bed. He found her face down on the ground and immediately called for help. Bainton, though, was already gone. Her death was linked to alcohol poisoning, according to an autopsy. She had more than 4 times the legal driving limit, and coroners found that the ethanol levels were revealed to be extremely high in the alcohol, and it basically poisoned Bainton. It's possible that the amount of booze consumed at the time of her death was significantly higher than what was suspected. Number 7. Amanda Eller. Amanda Eller, a hiker, survived for 17 days in the dense Hawaiian forest back in 2019. Eller's terrible story began with a 3-mile or just under 5-kilometer trek. She'd taken a different route than usual, though, and decided to stop, meditate, and nap. When the 35-year-old yoga instructor woke up, she couldn't find her way back to the car since she hadn't taken her phone with her. Eller survived for more than 2 weeks by eating berries and guava where she could find them while traveling through the thick forest. She drank river water only when it seemed clear enough to make sure it didn't make her sick. Aside from basic needs like food and shelter, Eller had to deal with a broken tibia and a horrific sunburn that quickly got infected. After her shoes were washed away in a freak flash flood, she had to walk barefoot. Eller eventually came to a point where the terrain made it impossible for her to keep walking. There was little to no food, and Amanda was afraid she would die there. Thankfully, she was seen by a search helicopter as she came out from a valley and was evacuated out of the wilderness. Eller had shed 15 pounds or just under 7 kilograms over those weeks and had multiple infections, as well as a fractured foot. But doctors were certain she would make a complete recovery. Do you think you could have survived? Let us know down in those comments, and if you like the video so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Number 6. Kylan Schultz and Crystal Turner. Kylan Schultz and Crystal Turner went camping on a regular basis. The newlyweds lived in a converted van and usually camped in Moab, Utah, where they both worked. When the weather was nice, the 2 women would set up a tent and sleep outside. But when Turner failed to come in to work at McDonald's on Monday, August 16, 2020, her co-workers got worried and called the police. Schulte and Turner were found dead near their tent in the La Salle Mountains 2 days later. They had been shot. The sheriff's office in Utah revealed little to no information about the killings, with one of the few public remarks claiming that there was no current danger to the public in the region. This just sparked more questions, since the county sheriff instead urged campers to be on high alert after officials discovered a stash of more than 30 weapons at a man's campsite near Telluride, just 2.5 hours from Moab. The warning came 4 days after officials declared that the unsolved killings posed no threat to the public. Sound safe to you? Schulte and Turner, the victims, had been together for almost 2 years and had just gotten married in April 2021 in Arkansas, where Turner is from. The two were last seen in public on August 13th when they were out for drinks with friends at a local bar called Woody's Tavern. They apparently complained about a man who was causing problems at their campsite and told their friends they were about to move because of him. Then Turner didn't come to work. Officers checked a nearby campsite but were unable to locate the bodies. Meanwhile, volunteer search and rescue teams were established on the ground in Moab and began the search. Schultz's aunt began posting on social media asking for help to find the missing women, when a family acquaintance also reached out and offered to begin looking on his own. On August 18th, the acquaintance spotted the woman's van while scouting a campsite. There, he found Schultz's body. He contacted her father and then the police, who confirmed that Schultz and Turner had been found dead in the mountains. Number 5. Ioana Hosiota. Ioana Hosiota was trying to become the youngest person to hike the Grand Canyon from beginning to end in February of 2012. Hosiota traveled to the United States from Romania while she was in her teens and was introduced to the canyons by a man that would later become her husband. Before the 24-year-old set off on a record-breaking attempt, the couple got married in a beautiful ceremony overlooking the canyon's valleys. During the trek, Hosiota and her hiking partner were on different paths, about 20 yards or about 18 meters apart when they crossed into the southern rim of the Owl Eyes Canyon. Hosiota was around 80 miles or just under 130 kilometers from her destination at the time. She was higher up when her husband started to hear little rocks falling from the sky. Then there was a tremendous thud. Hosiota's lifeless body was discovered on a rock ledge after she had fallen 300 feet or just over 90 meters. While little is known about the circumstances surrounding her fall, it is believed she slipped on one of those loose rocks. Devastated by her death, Hosiota's husband vowed he would finish the last leg of her hike while carrying a lock of her hair. Number 4. Michael St. Laurent. Michael St. Laurent, a seasoned hiker, was lost on a route in North Vancouver, Canada for 9 days. The 45-year-old set out on the Grouse Mountain hike expecting it to take him about 8 hours round trip. But due to adverse weather conditions, St. Laurent was forced to spend the night on the mountain. He'd taken a tarp and a dry change of clothes with him, which helped him survive the bitter cold. The next day, with injuries to his hip and knee after wandering off the established track, he was much more disoriented. Hypothermia had also begun to set in. By day 3, St. Laurent had lost track of time and thought he'd been lost for months. He was trembling violently by the end of the first week, overtaken by pain and haunted by bizarre hallucinations as he dredged through the chilly woods. He had difficulty telling between what was real and what was not, but he had the foresight to cover up with a tarp at night, which was probably what saved his life. St. Laurent's feet had become severely frostbitten, and he could feel his organs shutting down by the time he arrived at a helicopter landing zone. An off-duty rescue worker and her boyfriend found him. They gave him first aid and finally airlifted him out of the wilderness. In the aftermath of the tragedy, St. Laurent claimed that the experience taught him to always leave with a companion, no matter how short the trek is. Number 3. Geraldine Largay. Geraldine Largay and a friend hiked a special section of the famous Appalachian Trail in 2013, a route that connects Springer Mountain in Georgia to Mount Katahdin all the way in Maine. The 66-year-old retired nurse and her friend Jane Lee had left from West Virginia, where they planned to travel over 1,100 miles or just under 1,800 kilometers together, with Largay's spouse giving supplies along the way. Due to a family situation, Lee had to leave the hike in late June, and Largay, though, was determined to finish the journey on her own. Several weeks later, she was only 200 miles, or just about 325 kilometers from her destination in northern Maine, where a photo was taken of her by another hiker. This would be the last time anyone saw Largay alive. On July 22nd, she tried texting her husband to let him know that she had gotten lost, but the message was lost due to a poor cell reception. A search was started, but no evidence of Largay was ever found. It would be almost 2 years later before a logging surveyor discovered the woman's campground and remains. She had died inside her tent, zipped up in her sleeping bag. Through her suffering, she continued to write in her journal until mid-August 2013. With little hope of rescue and dwindling resources, Largay wrote in one of her final postings that she hoped whoever discovered her body would tell her family. Number 2. Louisa Vesterager Jespersen and Maren Juland. In December of 2018, Louisa Vesterager Jespersen of Denmark and Maren Juland of Norway were found beheaded in the High Atlas Highlands. Not long after, 3 Islamic State followers were captured in connection with the horrifying event. The convictions of ringleader Abdemasamad Yud, Yunus Uzwaid, and Rashid Afadi could come after social media petitions called for their executions. During the trial, it was revealed that 2 of the men had beheaded the 2 women, while Afadi took a video of the murders on his phone. The decision on the case came after an 11-week trial in Saleh near the capital of Rabat. Ijud confessed to murdering one of the 2 women and expressed regret. He also said to have received a prison sentence in Morocco for attempting to join the Islamic State in Syria before being released back in 2015. The 3 men all proudly declared that they were IS supporters, but IS had not claimed any responsibility for these killings. Kevin Zoller Guerreros, one of the men's accomplices, was also apprehended. He was a Spanish-Swiss convert to Islam who was suspected of teaching the suspects how to use encrypted messaging services as well as how to handle weapons. He was sentenced to 20 years in jail. Jespersen and Yulen, the victims, were roommates at Norway's Bo University. Their remains were discovered in a tent in a remote spot near Mount Tabuki, Morocco's highest peak, and also a popular hiking destination. Both had taken all the necessary equipment for their journey and wouldn't have been in harm's way. The women were merely on a Christmas camping trip while trying to become tour guides. The killers took 4 days to identify the women as targets before carrying out the attack. They picked these girls because other potential victims were all with guides. Moroccan authorities were strongly criticized by Jespersen's lawyer for neglecting to monitor the suspects' activities, which could have saved the women's lives. The Jespersen family asked the Moroccan government for $1 million in compensation for their, quote, moral responsibility. The court, however, denied this. Instead, each of the 3 individuals convicted were required to pay $200,000 in restitution, a small price to pay, considering the lives they took. Number 1. Michael Nepinski. Michael Nepinski of Seattle and a friend were on a snowy trip through Mount Rainier in November 2020. The 45-year-old and his partner then split up. When his friend kept going on the skis, Nepinski used snowshoes, and after Michael failed to arrive at the rendezvous point later that night, the emergency services were called. The man had been trapped in whiteout conditions and was discovered the next day by rescue aircraft. Nepinski was unconscious when he was transported to Seattle's Harborview Medical Center. He went into cardiac arrest as doctors began to treat him. His heart and lungs were bypassed and he was connected to an oxygenation machine, or ECMO, one of the most revolutionary types of life support in the world. In layman's terms, it pumps blood outside the body into a machine that removes the carbon dioxide and returns oxygen-rich blood to the body. Basically, taking the place of his heart after it had stopped for more than 45 minutes, this method effectively brought Nepinski back to life. He didn't remember much about the incident and thought he'd fallen during a whiteout based on the scrapes and bruises he had on his body. Following his return from clinical death, Nepinski said he would devote his life to helping others. Number 10. The Spring Creek Strangler. 30-year-old Karina Vetrano was violently assaulted and murdered on August 2, 2016. The Queens jogger was found with her teeth knocked out as she had desperately tried to beat the assailant off in a secluded patch of tall weeds near her home. It was evident from how much she had been beaten that she had put up a valiant fight until the very end. The ardent runner and fitness buff was working out alone in Spring Creek Park near her house in Howard Beach when she was attacked and dragged approximately 15 feet or just under 5 meters off a path. Her body was discovered brutally beaten up after a 4-hour search by the NYPD. She had scratches and marks all over her body. She even had the imprint of the killer's hand still on her neck as she was being strangled. There have been no official arrests, but police are interviewing numerous known sex offenders in the vicinity as well as vagrants who reside in the park. Police also interviewed Vetrano's ex-boyfriend and ruled him out as a suspect. Investigators suspect that the murderer was a stranger and are continuing to search for evidence near the scene of the crime. Karina and her father often ran down the park route together, but he remained home that Tuesday evening to recover from a back problem. He had warned her not to go near the location, but she assured him she would be all right. When she failed to come home by 7 p.m., over 2 hours after she had left, her father alerted the authorities, who traced her phone to a swampy, weed-infested region of the park where they found her body. Number 9. Antelope Island. 55-year-old Larry M. Adams was discovered on the Lakeside Trail in February 2017 by two ladies who heard him yelling for help. He was found with wounds consistent with a goring, and first aid was administered by the women and park guards who were called to the scene. In addition to the wounds, he had also suffered lacerations associated with being thrown by a bison. However, there were no witnesses to the supposed incident, and Adams died in a hospital the next night. Adams had mentioned his love and passion for Antelope Island in a Facebook post in October of the previous year on the Runners Group page. He mentioned bison encounters there, noting that there were a lot more bikers and distracted athletes in the region, and asked visitors who visit Antelope Island to be aware of the outdoors and consider their impact to avoid confrontations with the bison. On social media, friends honored Adams for his generosity, love of running, and love of the island, calling it his island for the number of times he had run out there and guided others to it as well. Others recounted happy memories with him there and spoke of his knowledge of the island trails and his love and respect for the animals there. Number 8. 10 Mile Murder. 53-year-old Dave Stevens was discovered hacked to death on White Rock Creek Trail in Dallas, Texas in early October 2015. He was the suspected victim of a random assault by former Texas A&M athlete Thomas Johnson. Patty, Stevens' wife, had expressed in an emotional interview that he was the joy of her life and stated that she felt lost without him. Stevens had gotten up at 5:30 a.m. on the day he was killed to run 10 miles or just about 16 kilometers around White Rock Lake, something he did 3 days a week. When he didn't return home, Patty became concerned, so she drove to the lake to search for his car. She discovered it and spent the rest of the day standing next to it. Patty called police after Stevens hadn't arrived by midnight. She was aware that a terrible death had occurred in the park earlier that morning, but she hoped it wasn't her husband. Her greatest suspicions were realized just a day later after a visit to the Dallas County morgue. Patty had since been having difficulty coping with her husband's death and was not eating or sleeping. She was found dead less than a week after the incident in a supposed suicide that the police refused to comment and give any information on, other than that her body was found in her garage. 21-year-old Texas A&M athlete Thomas Johnson was accused of Stevens' murder. He had reportedly called police himself after committing the deed to report the crime, claiming that he had been mad over being forced out of his home and took it out on Stevens. Number 7. Cane Corsos. 46-year-old Craig Sitzmo was jogging northbound on Thomas Road on the evening of July 23, 2014, wearing sunglasses and a black Harley-Davidson t-shirt when he was attacked by a pair of Cane Corsos. These dogs are massive, weighing more than 100 pounds or just about 45 kilograms. As Craig struggled for his life, the dogs dragged him down into a grassy ditch alongside the gravel road and bit him multiple times on his arms, chest and back, left buttock and leg. Even as a nearby neighbor tried to save his life and attempted CPR on him, the dogs charged back out of the woods, forcing her to back away until the dogs retreated. Police reports and witness accounts obtained by the Detroit Free Press under the Michigan Freedom of Information Act detail Craig's final moments, as well as the anxiety that had been growing in the town for several months as the dogs were on the loose. In the months leading up to the attack, 2 neighbors had also been bitten by the dogs, and others had begun to equip themselves with firearms for safety. The documents also paint a distressing image of the dog owners, who were aware of the dogs' hostility and violence, and had even been cautioned by the family vet that the dogs were too dangerous. The owners had even been sued over one of the dog bites, but took a few steps to keep the canines under control, even only for a brief time. The canines were known to routinely dig their way out of their chain-link kennel and may have done so on the day that Craig died. The owners were eventually charged with second-degree murder and remain in the Lapeer County Jail after failing to post $500,000 bonds. Number 6. Alligator Attack. Yovi Suarez Jimenez was running on a bike route along a creek near her house in Davie, Florida on December 8, 2006, when she was attacked by a 10-foot or 3-meter alligator. It bit both of her arms and shoulders and her back and right leg. It was a rare attack because it occurred outside of the water. According to medical specialists, the 28-year-old law student died suddenly while still on land due to a combination of blood loss and shock. The next day, construction workers discovered Jimenez's body floating in the canal, still wearing her Nike sneakers, sports bra, and cycling shorts. Nobody witnessed the incident itself, although bystanders informed police that they spotted a woman matching Jimenez's description dangling her feet from a canal bridge that evening. Jimenez, who lived in a nearby mobile home park, was observed leaving in running clothes by her family. She subsequently called her mother on her cell phone, telling her she was depressed and sitting under a bridge by the canal. Her mother had offered to pick her up, but Jimenez had declined the offer before their call was suddenly cut off. It was unclear why the alligator had attacked in such a manner, which was unheard of in the area. It was probable that the reptile was hungry, and they are known to get violent in that state. A 7-foot or 2-meter alligator was captured 3 days after the tragedy, but it was not the one who killed Jimenez. Since 1948, there have only been 25 fatal alligator attacks in Florida. What's the worst thing that happened to you while running or walking outside? Tell us in the comments and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 5. Shot in broad daylight. On July 30th, 2016, a woman was shot and killed during her daily jog in Oakland County, Michigan. 31-year-old Allie Brugger was running along Fish Lake Road in the Holly Village when she was shot in the back 4 times in broad daylight. Brugger slumped in the front yard of a nearby house, prompting residents to summon the police. The young nurse died as a result of the serious injuries she got in the shooting. The incident occurred about 2 miles or just over 3 kilometers from the woman's home, and her father, a Vietnam veteran, described it as an assassination. Brugger's mother told investigators that she was unaware of any concerns with anyone. Authorities couldn't rule out either parent as a suspect because they were each other's alibi, claiming to be at home when their daughter was killed. They were subsequently exonerated, and the father even passed a polygraph examination. The case of Brugger's death is still unsolved to this day. Police do believe that the victim knew her assailant, but police don't have any other leads, with the exception of a light-colored 4-door vehicle noticed in the neighborhood around the time of the shooting. Number 4. Eaten by wolves. There was finally conclusive evidence a year and a half after the incident that occurred in March 2010 that 32-year-old Candace Berner was attacked and killed by 2 or more wolves while running near the settlement of Chignik Lake on the Alaska Peninsula. Berner's death shook the village for days. She had come to Chignik to teach special needs youngsters. She was an ardent runner who stood barely 5 feet or just over 1.2 meters tall and was originally from Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania. She had gone for a run near the rural town 450 miles or just about 720 kilometers southwest of Anchorage in March. She had been jogging down a road less than 2 miles or 3.2 kilometers from the scattered cluster of houses when wolves started approaching Chignik. What exactly transpired next is unknown. However, there is little doubt that the wolves killed her and then fed on her body. Wolf DNA obtained from Berner's clothing matched DNA from wolves shot later in the region. The forensic evidence corroborated Berner's injuries as well as the wolf footprints discovered around her body. There was conjecture at the time that the wolves were ill or malnourished, as it was unclear why they had attacked. There was a further lack of any evidence that the wolves were defending a food supply or had become used to human food. Other wolf attacks have been attributed to habitation normally, and wolves conditioned to congregate near communities or camps because food is plentiful and have been known to lose their fear and confront or even attack humans. Number 3. Trash pile. A Florida man was caught on tape beating a runner with a sword following a quarrel over the possession of a plastic dump cart. The unidentified culprit can be seen in security footage swinging the weapon at 48-year-old Todd Beavers during the July 15, 2019 altercation in an Oakland Park area. Beavers was out on a jog when he noticed the cart on a garbage pile in front of a residence near Prospect Road and Northwest 11th Terrace. The man who was allegedly digging through the trash appeared to be enraged by Beavers trying to steal his find. The two had a verbal spat, but Beavers took the cart and soon realized he was being followed. The footage showed the suspect approaching Beavers and taking a sword from a red sheath before furiously lashing out at the victim's arms during a struggle for control of the cart. Beavers is seen motioning towards the house through video surveillance while carrying a cell phone. The attacker eventually flees, but the ordeal is far from over. Minutes later, an unidentified lady approached the victim's home and carried the cart away while yelling profanities. The woman, like the male sword-wielding garbage pile hunter, was recorded on camera and can be clearly seen in the 54-second clip. She was not identified, though. The police offered a $3,000 reward for any information about the unidentified assailants. The surveillance video was posted to the public on the police department's YouTube account. They say one man's trash is another man's treasure, but is a plastic dump cart found in a bulk trash pile worth going to jail for? A man in Oakland Park certainly thought so. Number 2, Unprovoked. Anthony Crawford pled guilty to first-degree murder in the stabbing of Wendy Martinez on September 18, 2018. He attacked her while she was out for an evening run in Logan Circle. Crawford was sentenced to 30 years in prison for the unprovoked killing of an innocent woman. Crawford allegedly stole a kitchen knife with a 5-inch or 12-centimeter blade from a local Giant supermarket, traveled about 5 blocks, and then stabbed Martinez 7 times while she was stopped at a junction waiting for the traffic signal. Crawford fled, leaving a bloody trail, and Martinez then limped into a nearby Chinese takeout restaurant where customers feverishly tried to save her life to no avail. 23-year-old Crawford had stepped up in shackles before his sentencing and spoke publicly for the first time about killing Martinez. In his comments, he apologized to his and Martinez's families for his stupid decision and blamed his mental health for his actions. He does have a history of mental illness and has taken synthetic substances that can create delusions as medicine. He was apprehended a mile north of where Martinez was stabbed in a park he frequented. Crawford's counsel stated that after his arrest he tested positive for cocaine but not synthetic substances. Crawford, according to his attorneys, chose not to pursue a mental illness defense and instead decided to plead guilty and serve the 30-year prison sentence, which is a mandatory minimum for first-degree murder in the district. Number 1, Aggressive Mother. On August 1st, 2017, Andy Llewellyn was running down Infinity Parkway near Cheliston Medical Center in Derby when he felt an almighty slap on the back of his head. The force turned out to be a bird that had caused 2 long gashes on the top of his head. He was treated for his injuries and given antibiotics by medics. It was rather unusual for a bird to be so aggressive, but it was most likely protecting his chicks. Llewellyn describes the incident by telling that he did not hear the bird coming, and for a few seconds he was left totally bewildered. He then put his hand to his head and saw the blood. He then explains that he got home and went straight to the walk-in clinic, and they even remarked that they'd never seen anything like it before. It was impossible to tell what kind of bird it was. While it was undoubtedly a distressing situation for Llewellyn, it's not typical behavior for birds. It's likely that the jogger got too close to the bird's nest, forcing the bird to act as a protective parent. This is especially true considering that this occurred around breeding season when bird mothers are increasingly vigilant and aggressive to any threats. Number 10, The Final Hike. In September 2021, a Virginia woman was found dead in Montana's Glacier National Park just days after she'd been reported missing. 34-year-old Jennifer Coleman was an avid hiker who loved to explore the wilderness. She was super excited to tackle the 2 trails at Logan's Pass, but little did she know it turned out to be her final hike. National parks don't usually have cell reception, especially if you're deep in the woods, so when she went missing, it took a few days for someone to notice. In fact, it was her empty car in the parking lot that drew officials' attention and led to a rescue team looking for her. The search party of nearly 50 people was formed on a Friday as they all set out on a quest to find Jennifer and get her back to safety. But the feeling of dread started to grow with each passing hour of searching, and by Sunday, hopes of her survival had vanished. Everyone's fears finally came true when her body was found in a steep and rocky area next to the Continental Divide. Not only did her death send shockwaves across the hiking community, but it sent a ton of safety awareness foundations into motion. Interestingly enough, the cause of her death remains shrouded in mystery to this very day. Number 9, Unknown Hazards. In August 2021, a California national forest was closed down after a couple was found dead on a trail. The cause of their death? No one really knows. 45-year-old Jonathan Garish was out for a nice family vacation in Sierra National Forest with his 31-year-old wife Ellen Chung, their 1-year-old daughter, and their family dog. To be fair, it would have been a weekend to remember if only Mother Nature hadn't come with other plans for them. The scorching sun brought out the heat while the inner trails harbored toxic gas. A couple of days into their fun hiking trip, a family friend reported that they'd gone missing since no one had heard from them. This obviously led to search parties being formed to find and retrieve them. Also, while the trail they were on was full of trees and shade, the unforgiving sun managed to raise the temperatures to over 109 degrees or just under 43 degrees Celsius that day. Plus, the trail also had some algae poisoning in the water in that area, which officials did warn everyone about. It seems like the family didn't heed the warnings though, since their dead bodies were found on the Mariposa County hiking trail just a few days later. Now here's where it gets interesting. Apparently the cause of their death was chalked up to unknown hazards in the area,
area. The officials just couldn't pinpoint what exactly killed them. But in all seriousness, there were no signs of carbon monoxide poisoning from the mines, consumption of toxic chemicals, or even any strange things like guns or other weapons. And for this very reason, the trail was closed down for all tourists while panic ensued all over their mysterious deaths. Number 8. Leap of faith. In January 2022, a San Diego teacher was found dead by some hikers at the base of a granite formation in Joshua Tree National Park. 35-year-old Michael Spitz was a high school Spanish teacher at the Santa Fe Christian School who loved to hike and climb rock formations during his free time. So it was just a normal day in his life when he decided to head over to the California National Park for a weekend adventure. His goal? To do the 100-foot classic Illusion Dweller climb to the top of the Sentinel Granite Formation all by himself. Oh, and while it might sound scary to a rookie, this wasn't his first rodeo. As a matter of fact, he actually used this climb as a warm-up for more difficult ones nearby, and he knew it like the back of his hand. Besides, he'd free-soloed 5,000 feet or just about 1.5 kilometer climbs before, making this child's play in comparison. So no one really knows what happened that made him stumble and fall 80 feet or just about 24 meters to the ground at around 5 p.m. that Sunday. What makes the fall even more brutal is the fact that he didn't die on the spot. Instead, he survived the fall and passed at some point that night. It wasn't until 10 a.m. the next day when hikers stumbled upon his dead body. Apparently, Michael romanticized solo climbing and felt extremely confident in his ability, so much so that he was convinced he couldn't fall. But it was one of the easier climbs that claimed his life. Would you rather climb down a mountain or bungee jump straight into a ravine? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Number 7. Lost in the woods. In July 2017, a woman's dead body was found in the Sam Houston National Forest after she'd been reported missing by her husband. 55-year-old Teresa Kirkpatrick was out with her husband Alan to pick up a motorcycle that got stuck in the woods off Stubblefield Lake Road. And at some point during the search, she lost contact and straight up disappeared. Now at this point, the wise thing would have been to report the incident to officials, but Alan decided it would be a good idea to keep searching for her by himself. And after almost 8 hours of no luck, he finally gave up and headed to the police. Search parties were formed, and a day later her body was found deep inside the forest. Here's where it gets interesting. Her brother Kaiser claims that Alan killed her. Why? Well, according to him, she couldn't have gone into the wilderness alone because she had a bad back, suffered from diabetes, high blood pressure, and emphysema. What's more, she couldn't even bear the heat of her own porch for 30 minutes, so there's no doubt she couldn't handle a national forest. On top of that, her medical condition didn't let her go hiking or ride bikes, which makes this whole situation so suspicious. Oh, and apparently, Alan also had a history of physical abuse, as Kaiser and some of the family members had to step in at times to defend her. But while there was definitely a precedent of violence there, the sheriff's department didn't actually find any visible signs of trauma on her body. Number 6. Freak show. Last year in September, the disappearance of a social media influencer made international headlines when her fiancé returned from a road trip without her. 22-year-old Gabby Petito and her fiancé Brian Laundrie had a pretty wide social media presence as they documented their ambitious journey across the country. And one of the big staples of their adventure was how many different national parks they could visit. Everything looked great from the outside until social media updates stopped one day in August. And things really took a dark turn a week later when Brian returned from the journey without Gabby alongside him. At this point, he refused to talk to the police or even her family. Also, they couldn't contact Gabby either. In fact, the last text she sent out was around the same time their social media went dark, sparking even more suspicions about her safety. So with Brian not saying anything, her family reported her missing. And before the police could even trace her location, Brian bailed and disappeared himself. 2 days after this, though, Gabby's body was found in Bridger-Teton National Forest in Wyoming with clear signs of strangulation. Now, this obviously meant they had had a fight and Brian had murdered her on the trip. Oh, and apparently the last text that she had sent, that was sent by him too. But everyone got the shock of their lives when, after a month of searching, Brian's own skeletal remains were found inside the Carlton Reserve in Sarasota, Florida. So maybe there were even darker forces at play here. The case is still fresh in our minds though, and our hearts go out to Gabby's loved ones. Number 5. Into the rainstorm. In April 2017, a mountain biker rode into the rainstorm in Olympic National Park and would never be seen alive again. 22-year-old Jacob Gray was fascinated by the idea of being one with nature and regularly went on trips throughout national parks with his bike. Little did he know, though, that his wishes of reconnecting with nature would unfold in the most tragic way possible. His last outing in Washington proved deadly as he cycled his way through a rainstorm to a summit at a nearby hill, but much to the dismay of his father Randy, he never made it back. Jacob's bike and gear were found on the side of a trail, and it looked like he'd been prepping a campsite nearby, since the tarp and other equipment were lying on the ground. He, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen, so his father sold his house, closed his business, and rallied some people to search for his beloved missing son. He spent months looking, all the while thinking what could have happened to his dear boy. Many thoughts crossed his mind, including accidents, murder, or even self-harm, as Jacob did have a history of some mental health issues. By August, he'd all but given up his search when he got a phone call that a group of researchers found Jacob's body much higher on the mountain than anyone would have thought, and the cause of death was labeled as hypothermia. Now, while Randy had lost his son to the forces of nature, at least he found peace in the fact that even during his final moments, he made his father proud by pushing himself and reaching new heights. Number 4 vanished into thin air. In June 2021, an Irishman visiting Grand Teton National Park mysteriously disappeared without a trace, and to this day, his remains have yet to be found. 27-year-old Sion McLaughlin loved finding new trails and often went hiking during his time off, so it wasn't unusual for him to visit a national park to appreciate the grand scope of it. What was strange, though, was the fact that after his mini Wyoming vacation, he didn't show back up at work. McLaughlin was then reported as missing, with his last sighting putting him somewhere in the direction of Taggart Lake. His car was also found parked near the area. Now, the thing about this lake is that its 8-mile or just under 13-kilometer trail is notoriously difficult, and according to witnesses, he wasn't carrying a backpack, which is usually a recipe for disaster. At the same time, the trail was apparently one of his favorites, and he'd been through it multiple times. 45 helicopter rounds, high-tech tools, flyers, posters, hashtags, and literally everything was thrown into the search for Sion, who seemed like he'd vanished into thin air. Plus, false reports of his sighting didn't help either. In fact, one of these leads from 40-year-old Heather Myskaki led the police on a 500-hour wild goose chase, which resulted in her getting banned from the national park for 5 years. Despite everyone's continued efforts, Sion's remains still haven't been found, and his disappearance still puzzles minds to this day. Number 3, fight for life. In October 2020, a California woman went missing for over 10 days in the cruel wilderness of Utah's Zion National Park. 38-year-old Holly Suzanne Cordier was set to go on a spiritual pilgrimage to unwind and rediscover herself, but the only thing she found was despair and agony. After getting dropped off by a private shuttle bus at the national park, Holly was supposed to roam around and come back 4 hours later to join the rest of the tourists, but she never did. Search parties were sent out to look for her as she turned into an online sensation, with people speculating all sorts of things about the case. Some even called her family's fundraiser a big scam, saying that the story of her disappearance didn't make sense. Also, she left her phone behind, so there was no way of even contacting the woman either. Even after a week of extensive searching, Suzanne was nowhere to be seen. This was not her time to die, though. After 10 long days of searching, she was found. Holly was famished, many pounds lighter, and extremely dehydrated. She was also concussed, had kidney failure, and multiple foot injuries thanks to hypothermia. But most of all, what she did have was the will to live, as she brilliantly survived her way through the wilderness for over a week and returned a hero for living through it all. It must have been some spiritual journey for sure. Number 2, nowhere to be found. In May 2013, a man in the Canadian Army Reserve went on a 1,700-mile or just over 2,700-kilometer road trip to Kosciuszko National Park and never made it home. 25-year-old Pradeep Shran was an exchange student on Australia's Gold Coast when he randomly decided to drive to Melbourne to hike up some mountains. So he rented a van, drove up to the national park's Charlotte Pass, and set out on his quest to summit the peak in dense snow. But of course, he never returned from the journey. In fact, no one even noticed he disappeared until the rental company reached out to his family to ask about the missing vehicle. And from that point on, the search for Shran began. Now, we don't quite know for how many days after his disappearance the search started, since people only found out about it when the van's rental time had expired. So for all intents and purposes, he could have been missing for weeks. After 2 weeks of searching, the Australian authorities called off the search. Shran's parents then hired private investigators to look for him, and using the hike plans found on his laptop in the van and some other tower data from his phone, they were able to track his trail to the treacherous Western Fall Wilderness. But despite a year-long private search, his body was never found. Number 1, Glacier of Death. In July 2022, Montana's Glacier National Park claimed the life of 3 experienced climbers, all within just a few days of each other. 67-year-olds Brian Kennedy and Jack Beard were climbing partners and regularly visited national parks to seek thrills. In fact, they'd been hiking Glacier's towering peaks for decades, and often visited so often that the park staff knew them personally. So it was a shocking revelation when they didn't return home as planned 3 days after they'd started their journey. It didn't take long for rescuers to find their bodies, as they'd taken a pretty common path. With that being said, the cause of their death remains unknown. They weren't the only ones to suffer this fate during that week, though. Just a day after their bodies been found, 79-year-old Bob Biondi from Florida also fell to his death while climbing off a steep trail slope on the Rising Wolf Mountain with some of his friends. And while officials say these 2 incidents weren't linked to each other, they're also a stark reminder of the risks involved with climbing rock formations that can fall apart so easily right under your feet. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be lost in a national park alone for 3 days or get attacked by a wild animal while hiking? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on The Bad Badger.